Pickens Creek Productions presents Night Brings Darkness by J.M. Gaines. Read by the author, J.M. Gaines. For Pawpaw. Thank you for inspiring me to read and for being the best grandpa a boy could have. Prologue. A cool breeze wafted up off the white-capped ocean waves and onto the damp sand. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. Seagulls glided, wings spread up above, calling out to the phantoms of the sea. A mother sat on a towel beside her son. The beach was completely empty, except for them. It was early fall. The mother played with her child's hair, looking down at him. "I love you so much, my Charles," she said with a smile. The boy sat silently and looked out at the vastness. The sun was beginning its descent, an orange hue dancing across the water. The horizon was a thin line of blues and reds and golds, going out in all directions. The mother looked at her son with worry. "What is the matter?" The boy lifted his eyes to hers. They were full of tears. "Will you always be here?" he asked. "Yes, of course. What makes you say such things?" He began to cry louder, a heartbreaking sob, and it did break her heart. He looked through cloudy eyes. "Why are you lying to me?" "I'm not. I will always be here. Dad's not here." The reply hit her like a punch in the gut. She knew he was right, knew that she wouldn't always be here. She would die someday, just like her husband, his father, had. She had no response. "Why can't everyone live forever? Why do people have to die?" the boy said between breaths. "Why can't you live forever?" The mother no longer smiled. She no longer played with the boy's hair. She no longer enjoyed the ocean breeze or waves. She just sat and looked out as the sun dipped its final rays below the curve of the earth. She had nothing left to say. Chapter 1. Farm. The sun shone down bright and hot on the fields and woods that surrounded the old farmhouse. Lucas Masterson had inherited the house and the land from his parents 5 years ago, chipped white splintered boards and all. He had moved his family out here to help with his ailing father. Then they just never left. The move had not been easy for his wife, Mary. Their son Samuel had loved it. The wide open space was new to him, and he took to it well, running through the wheat fields, playing in the fast-moving creeks. It all came naturally to his 8-year-old body. Lucas had grown up here. The nostalgia of this place ran as deep as the roots of the sawtooth oak he had planted when he was at a similar age as Samuel. The oak had grown just as Lucas did, tall and strong over the years. He had left when he came of age to go find himself. He traveled all over the country and to a few other countries looking for a purpose in this world, his place in it. But he had always been drawn back here, like a magnet. Back to this farm, back to Hoover Springs. Now he stood and looked out over his old childhood home. Not much had changed here. The 40 acres of land was speckled by woods and fields that ran in all directions, separated by the dirt road that cut in between. Cedars, pines, and oaks sprouted through the forest, where a small creek flowed. The house was an 80-year-old single-story fixer-upper that still hadn't been fixed up. The paint was peeling on the cracked boards, but at least the tin roof was new. The insurance had taken care of that. The farm had been in his family for 3 generations. It wasn't really a working farm. At least there was no money being made. It was more of a hobby farm. There were a few chickens and some goats to play around with, and they had a small garden every summer, but it didn't produce much. Some cucumbers, squash, Maybe a watermelon every once in a while. But Lucas and Samuel loved it. A tear entered his eye as he thought back on all the memories he had here. Walking the dirt roads with his mom on cool fall evenings, going deer hunting with his dad, playing cowboys and Indians with his younger brother, his first kiss under a moonlit summer sky when he was 16. He especially remembered the times with his grandpa, riding down the back roads in the old Ford Bronco, helping with yard work, riding in his lap on the tractor. There were so many great memories, some forgotten, some he would never forget. Some memories he didn't want to remember. Like that tragic day when he was just a boy. He pushed the thought out of his mind. Today was not the day to think of such dark things. The past is the past. It was time to focus on the present. He sighed as he wiped a tear along with dirt and sweat off his cheek and continued his work. He was cutting up the oak tree. It had finally fallen after all these years. He remembered the day he and Grandpa had planted it. They had been out on the property all day planting all kinds of trees, cypress, oak, birch. They had been out riding around in the Bronco, planting saplings. Grandpa had asked him if he wanted one near the front of the house, one he could call his own. That had excited young Lucas. My own tree. So they picked out a spot near the entrance to the driveway and planted the sapling there. It looks small now, but someday it'll be as tall as the house. You watch and see, Grandpa said. Young Lucas had stared at the little sapling. He just couldn't believe it could ever be as big as him, let alone the house. How long will it take to grow that big, he asked. About as long as it'll take you to grow up, 7 or 8 years. That's a long time, Grandpa. Much shorter than you think. So you enjoy your youth while you can. Grandpa had died 3 years after that, never seeing Lucas or the tree grow up. Now the tree was gone too, the last nail in the coffin of his grandpa's legacy. It lay in front of him, a heap of destruction. A terrible storm had blown in the night before and poured down a river out of the sky. The wind had whipped hell through the yard. The ground softened, and the big oak just couldn't hold out any longer. It uprooted and fell, missing the house by a slim miracle. Thank God for small favors, Lucas thought as he pushed the chainsaw through a limb like a hot knife through butter. At least he had plenty of firewood for the short winters they had here. He continued slicing through the tree, cutting apart the trunk. Sweat began to trickle down his forehead and into his eyes, stinging them. He stopped the chainsaw. The summer days in this part of the country had always been scorchers. Today was no different. Lucas took a long swig of bottled water. It was warm from being in the sun, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. He looked out over the fields again, his blue eyes searching for Samuel. He saw him in the distance, playing with the dog. Samuel was the best thing that had ever happened to Lucas and Mary. They didn't plan on having him so early in their marriage, but as the saying goes, life finds a way. The first time he held his boy, his entire outlook on life had changed. It seemed to instantly mature him. Nothing else seemed to matter anymore except for the well-being of Samuel. Mary loved the boy just as much. A few years after the birth was when his father had gotten sick. It was hard on Lucas, seeing his father bedridden that way. It was not the way he had wanted to remember him. He would rather remember how he was, a vibrant, gentle man full of life. His father was an outdoorsman who loved to fish, hunt, and camp. Lucas made sure his final days were comfortable and that he got to see as much of his grandson as he could stand. It was much harder on Lucas's mother. They had been married for 40 years. She died soon after her husband, of a broken heart. Her heart had been broken for another reason before that, though, a reason Lucas didn't like thinking about. After burying both of his parents, Lucas took over the farm. It wasn't something he had ever expected he would do. He didn't want to stay in Hoover Springs at all, but he had ended up getting stuck here anyway. His life was here now. Lucas took another gulp of warm water and looked down at the tree. He had made some decent progress, but the tree was massive, so he had a lot more work ahead of him. He ran his tan fingers through his dirty blonde locks before beginning the work again. He looked back in Samuel's direction. His heart dropped. There, standing just behind his son, was something. Something dark, something evil, grotesque. The thing began to reach out its gnarled, clawed hands towards his son. It snarled an evil, wicked grin from its sunken face. Fangs protruded from its saliva and blood-filled mouth. Its eyes a deep, rich red terror. Lucas looked on in horror. He was about to run to his son's rescue when a rough voice spoke from behind, making him jump, dropping the chainsaw. "You all right?" He looked down at the saw and then back up at his son. The figure was gone. It seemed to vanish in a puff of black smoke. The only thing in the field now was Samuel and the dog. Hallucination or premonition? Lucas wiped his hand over his face before he turned around to face his neighbor, Bill Williams. Bill and his wife Margaret had been Lucas's parents' neighbors for as long as he could remember. As a kid, Lucas and his brother would play football in the field with Bill's kids. They had been loyal family friends throughout the years. Even after Lucas's parents had passed away, Bill and Margaret had been there to comfort him. Lucas had stayed pretty close with Bill over the years. "Did you see that?" Lucas asked. "See what?" Bill looked confused. Lucas decided he better drop it. Might make him look crazy. Never mind, it was nothing. "I'll ask one more time. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I think this heat is just getting to me. So take a break." Lucas could smell the liquor on his breath even from this distance, a good 10 feet away. "What brings you over here, Bill?" Bill took a cigarette from his front blue t-shirt pocket and placed it into his gray-bearded mouth that was yellow around the mustache. His hand shook a little as he sparked the Zippo lighter and lit the end, inhaling. "Can't a neighbor have a friendly visit anymore?" He grunted through a puff of smoke. "What is this country coming to?" Bill stumbled a little as he spoke. "Margaret nagging you again?" "You know how she gets when I've been drinking." "I know." He knew all about Bill and Margaret's relationship. Bill loved to get drunk and vent to him about it. Bill did have a bit of a drinking problem, and he loved to gamble, but he was a decent guy all around. He and Margaret had been married over 50 years. Lucas knew they loved each other, but they were an old couple and fussed a lot. "That storm sure played hell on this place, didn't it?" Bill's smoke breaking through Lucas's thoughts. "Yeah, it did." "Finally got that old oak, huh?" "Yeah, the wind tore her down." "Up for a poker game tonight with the boys?" "Not tonight. I got plans with the family." "What y'all gonna do?" "Probably go watch a movie at the theater." "That'll be fun." "I think so." "How much food you got stored away?" Lucas knew where Bill was going with this. Bill loved talking about conspiracies with his old military buddies. He had a different idea every week about some catastrophe that would happen next. "What is it this week, Bill?" "I've been hearing things." "This is the big one, Lucas. Something is about to happen that will spell the end for us all." He took a long drag and let it out slowly. "You and Pete been talking again?" Lucas halfway chuckled. "This is serious. You need to make sure you have everything your family needs. Things are gonna get bad." "Where do y'all get y'all's information from, anyway?" "This is coming from a good source." "I just bet it is." A shout in the distance pierced through the afternoon air. It was Mary. "Lucas!" "Sounds like it's time for supper." Lucas was relieved. He wanted to change the subject, and this presented the perfect opportunity. "Where are y'all having?" Lucas could tell that Bill wanted to be invited over for supper, but he also knew how much of an issue that would cause with Mary if he did. She didn't like company all that much, unless she knew way in advance. Even then, it was annoying for her. Lucas sighed. "I'm not sure what we're having." Mary's voice broke through the awkward silence that ensued. "Samuel! Lucas!" She got a mouth on her carries clear close to my house sometimes. Bill shifted forward on one foot. You got that right. Lucas turned away, letting his body language do the talking. I guess I better get going and get Samuel. We'll see you later, Bill. Bill took the hint. All right, I guess I better go as well. He then turned and staggered away, mumbling and puffing as he went. Lucas wiped the sweat from his brow and drank the rest of his water before heading into the field. Samuel was still playing with the dog. Lucas called to him. Did you hear your mama calling for us? Samuel walked forward with the dog by his side before he answered his father. Yes, sir. You ready to go in? Yeah, I'm hungry. Me too. Let's go eat. We still going to town after supper? Yeah. Okay. Samuel's eyes held excitement. Lucas looked out at the field one last time before the pair turned and walked towards the house. Chapter 2. Supper. Mary Louise Masterson. Her maiden name had been Stevens, but she was glad to be rid of that. Mary set the table with ease and grace as she waited for her man and boy to enter the old house. She had done it 1,000 times now over the years, and it came to her as pure habit at this point. They had lived here for 5 years, on this farm in the middle of nowhere. She was a city girl at heart. The country life was something she had had to grow into. Samuel adjusted well. She was glad of that, but it took her a while, and she still didn't really like it. She would never tell Lucas that, of course. She loved her man more than the city. He had persuaded her to stay here by saying it would be more safe for Samuel, better for his upbringing. Her career was in the city. She didn't want to give all that up. In the end, she hadn't had to. The company let her work remotely. Lucas had applied to become a game warden, a coveted position within Glander County. It was what his father had been. The demand was high, and Lucas really wasn't qualified for the job. She had hoped he wouldn't get it, and then maybe they could stay in the city. But he had gotten it. Everyone in the county had grown up knowing his father. They remembered how good of a game warden he had been. They all knew Lucas as well. It was a clear-cut case of nepotism. So they moved. After she finished with the table, she sat down on the couch with a sigh. She brushed a strand of brown hair from her smooth face. It was boring here. Nothing to do around the farm. Nothing to do in the small town of Hoover Springs. All of her friends and family were back in the city, hours away. She had tried to make friends in town, but everyone there had grown up together, and it made her feel like an outcast. She was an outcast here. She thought back to her mother, Joan. Her mother had not been the best maternal figure, to say the least. She did a poor job raising her and her 2 siblings. Joan was a bad decision-maker, always blowing their money. They grew up poor because of it. Mary had no father to speak of, or at least she had never met him. Her mother had never been married and was bad at choosing men. They had moved around a lot. Mary had decided early on she didn't want to end up like her mother. Joan was a classic narcissist, verbally abusive to all her kids. She would never physically hit them, but she would cut them down with words every chance she got, then play the victim when called out on it. Mary had forgiven her long ago. She wouldn't hold a grudge against her mom, but she would never become her either. At the age of 18, Mary had left and never wanted to look back. Her mother had tried to stop her, but in the end she couldn't. Mary studied hard in high school and college, making sure she had the highest grades. She had graduated both with honors. She scored a good job straight out of college, and from there moved into a career in finances at a good company. She thought it was ironic that she had grown up so poor, and now she was working with money. She met Lucas a few years after college. She had been on one of her girls' trips out in Colorado with some of her college friends. They had kept in contact after they graduated, and they would take a trip at least once a year. That year, they had decided to go hiking in the Rocky Mountains. Mary was the designated driver. She had never driven in the mountains before, so she rounded a switchback way too fast going into the other lane, sideswiping Lucas's truck. When they pulled off to the side and stepped from their cars, her friends had noticed how cute he was, and had told her just that. They had traded contact info and insurance. They began talking. Lucas had been in Colorado for similar reasons, touring and hiking. They had hung out almost the entire trip after that. It was a strange way to meet the love of your life, but there he was. She had instantly fallen for him. He was tall and handsome. He still had that small dent and scratch in the side of his Toyota. He had never gotten it repaired, said it had been a great memory to him, and he didn't want to lose it by covering it up. They got married a year later. A year after that, they had Samuel. She never wanted kids. She had seen the way Joan had treated her kids, and it scared her. She thought by having kids she would become her mother. Samuel was an accident, but when he came, Mary was sorry she had ever not wanted kids. Samuel was the best thing that ever happened to her. Motherhood came naturally. She didn't understand how her own mother had screwed it up so badly. Lucas and Samuel came through the front door. She stood from the couch to meet them. "Go wash your hands, boys," she said before they could sit at the table. "Yes, Mother," Lucas said jokingly. That made Samuel laugh. He stopped when Mary gave him a stern look. "How was work?" Lucas called from the bathroom. "It was good. I've been pretty busy with the project lately. How goes the storm cleanup?" she replied. Samuel dried his hands and sat down at the table. Lucas followed. "It's been going all right. Still a lot more to do, though." "I bet there is. That was a rough one last night." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "And I'm sorry about the tree." He looked back at her. "It's all right. It was an old tree. Bound to happen sooner or later." He changed the subject. "Sure does smell good, Mary. You always were a good cook. One of the reasons I married you." She blushed as she placed a big plate of grilled chicken on the table. "Thanks," she said. Then she took her seat. "Can I eat in my room?" Samuel asked. Mary was non-indulgent. "Absolutely not." "Oh, Mama, please. Rodney Piper's mama lets us eat in his room and I stay over there." "I'm not Rodney Piper's mom." "Daddy, can I please?" Lucas met Mary's gaze. He knew immediately what the answer to that question had better be. "Not tonight, bud. Maybe another night. Me and you will have a movie night and we'll eat in your room, okay?" "Okay," he said reluctantly. "Speaking of movies, which one did you say we were going to see tonight?" Mary asked as she began to pass around a bowl of mashed potatoes, taking a helping for herself first. "Revenge of the Space Aliens," Samuel answered with much excitement. Mary rolled her eyes. Lucas laughed as he grabbed a dinner roll and put it on his plate. "You want to pray for us, dear?" Mary said. They bowed their heads. Chapter 3. Downtown. After dinner was over, the trio piled into Lucas's old Toyota truck and headed into town. The harsh sun was beginning its slow descent. Hoover Springs was always pretty lively on a Friday night. If it had been fall, most of the town would have been at the high school football game, cheering on the Hoover Springs Sharks. They drove slowly down the main road, Springs Road, that went right into downtown. Pedestrians walked the sidewalks, enjoying the evening air. Purple, white, yellow, blue, and red flowers lined the streets, creating a concoction of summer color that was rather appealing to the eyes. Shops, businesses, and houses with mailboxes on the curb bordered the road, a tunnel of American dreams. Downtown Hoover Springs came into view. The two-story City Hall sat in the center of the town square. A huge American flag was perched up on top, flying with the wind. Patriotic. Downtown had been redone a few years ago. It had gone pretty far downhill, and the city board had fitted the bill to bring it back up to proper standards, raising the taxes in the process. A product of gentrification. Families and groups of friends walked the square drinking coffee, eating ice cream, shopping at the local shops. Everyone looked happy. It was as if small-town American culture had put on its best face tonight. Mary knew better. She knew that this town had its secrets, like all towns do. The thing about a small town is, it is hard to keep those secrets. She had a secret of her own, one she could never tell, would never tell anyone. They pulled into the theater parking lot around 7, Hoover's Cinemas. It was a small theater. They had only one auditorium and played a different movie every week. This theater had taken the place of the drive-in Lucas had known as a kid. That had been his first real job. He had worked there at 15 years old. Mary looked over at Samuel, who sat in between them in the front seat. "You sure this movie isn't going to be too scary for Samuel?" She looked up at Lucas as she spoke. He undid his seatbelt. "He'll be fine." "Yeah, I'll be fine," Samuel said. "Okay." She opened her door and hopped out. Samuel followed her, and she shut the door behind him. It closed with a loud clang. She tried to grab his hand, but he pulled away, looking at his father. "Samuel, give me your hand." "I don't want to, Mama. I'm too big for that now." "Oh, so big boys don't hold their poor old mama's hands?" "No, they don't." "Oh, really? I guess big boys don't like ice cream either, do they?" "I still like ice cream. Even adults like ice cream." He had her there. The reality Mary didn't want to face was that Samuel was getting older. He wouldn't always be her little boy forever. He had begun to look more and more like his father every day. In 7 or 8 years, the girls would be swooning over him. She didn't want to think about all that now. She was glad that time was still years away. "Fine, whatever. But you stay close to us." She met eyes with Lucas, who couldn't help but have a sheepish grin. His father's boy. As they began their walk toward the front door to get their tickets for the film, a man stepped close to Lucas, grabbing his arm. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" It was Jim Barlow, the local sheriff. He had been one of Lucas's classmates back in the day. Most of his graduating class had moved away from the town to go off to college, or they just moved away to get away, as Lucas had done many times. It was odd to Lucas. You spend all that time trying to be cool in high school, trying to fit in. Then after you graduate, you never see each other again. At least not often. "What is it, Jim?" Lucas said, annoyed. Jim looked over at Mary and Samuel. Mary had a look of death. "In private," Jim said. Lucas sighed. "Mary, you and Samuel go ahead in. Get us a good seat. I'll be along soon." Mary glared at Jim. Then she grabbed Samuel's hand. He protested, but she wasn't having it this time. She stomped off in the direction of the theater, dragging the boy behind her. "Geez," Jim said after she was out of earshot. "What did you expect, Jim? This was supposed to be my day off. You come waltzing up here out of nowhere and grab me away while we're trying to go watch a movie? Sorry, Lucas, this is important." "So important you couldn't ring up my cell phone about it?" The sheriff looked away. "I tried to call. Your phone must be dead or something." Lucas smirked. "Oh yeah, I forgot to charge it today. Anyway, I saw you in town and I figured I could just catch you while you were here," Jim said. "Not while I'm off duty. You know how Mary is about quality family time. It's important to me too. Get whatever it is that's so important off your chest and hurry it up." Jim cleared his throat. "I need you to do me a solid. I'm short-handed at the station and one of my deputies is off at the speed trap north of town." Edna Pensky keeps hearing noises in her pipes. Swears up and down she's got a demon living in her bathtub drain. Lucas interrupted. Get to the point, Jim. Right. The sheriff cleared his throat again. I'm kinda in a bind here. Charlie Decker keeps harassing my station phone about his neighbors. Says he keeps hearing weird noises at night. Says it's keeping him awake. He said he's about ready to walk over there with a shotgun and blow their heads off. I figure since that's kinda more your department anyway that you could go take a look for me. Tonight? Or tomorrow? He lives beside him, you know him? Never seen anyone over there. It's 5 miles south of town. All right. I'll try to fit it into my schedule. Was there anything else? He looked away. Nathan Andrews claims to have seen a gator down by the springs. Nathan Andrews the plumber? Asked Lucas. Yeah. Lucas began to laugh a little. Nathan Andrews is also known to dabble in the shrooms. I'm sure he did see a gator, and it probably had a rainbow tongue. Jim had to agree with that. Maybe so. I'll check on Charlie's neighbor, but I'm not chasing a drug-fueled hallucination around town. Fair enough. That it? Lucas was ready to just walk away from the conversation if it wasn't. Yeah. Go enjoy the movie. Will I see you in church Sunday? Lucas was short. You might. All right, see you later then. The sheriff turned and walked back up the sidewalk, disappearing around a corner on the street. Lucas didn't know it, but that was the last time he would ever see the man alive. Chapter 4. Dessert. When the film was over, the family headed to the Daily Grind, a local coffee shop next to the theater. Besides having amazing organic coffee, they were most famous for their homemade ice cream. They had a variety of flavors to choose from. Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, peach, cherry, cookie dough. The list went on. And on a Friday night in early summer, they were always packed. Lucas, Samuel, and Mary waited in line for their turn to order. Lucas remembered getting ice cream with his parents and his little brother on Friday nights. They didn't have this fancy place to go to back then, though. Back then, it was Tripp's Ice Cream Parlor. Tripp's was where all the kids hung out. Lucas remembered the place fondly. He was there a lot with his best friends. He took girls on dates there in middle school. When Tripp died, the place closed down. This town had changed a lot since those days. Still a lot stayed the same. Lucas saw Bill's friend Pete in the corner sitting down with a mug of hot coffee. He told Mary to hold his spot in line, then stepped over to speak to him. Hey, Pete. How you doing? Pete had the mug up to his lips and was about to take a big swallow of the bitter drink, but he put it down to answer. Lucas Masterson. I guess they let anybody in here, Pete joked. I talked to your buddy Bill earlier. He said y'all had a card game planned tonight. I figured you'd still be at it. Yeah, we had to cancel that this time because Bill said Margaret was in a sour mood tonight. You know, with her health and all. I hope she's okay. Just keep her in your prayers. Anyway, I figured I could come out here and get me a late night cup of coffee. Didn't have anything else going on. Yeah, we're just in town watching a movie at the theater. Figured we'd stop in here and get some ice cream before we head on back towards the house. Don't blame you there. Best ice cream in the county if you ask me. I agree with that. You been busy down at the shop? Oh yeah, these people around here are always needing an oil change. You let me know if you need one anytime soon for that old Toyota. I'll treat her right. Pete winked. I know you will. He looked over at Mary. Well, let me get on back in line. It was nice seeing you, Pete. You too, Lucas. As he turned around, someone brushed past him in a full sprint, almost running into him. He stepped back in shock. Excuse me, he said aloud to no one, because the person who had run by him was already out the front door running down the street. He took a step forward, and his foot slid on something on the floor. Lucas glanced down, thinking it was probably some spilled ice cream or something. To his surprise, it wasn't. He reached down and picked up an ID badge. The person in a hurry to leave must have dropped it. He looked at it. Printed in uppercase letters across the top was Avery Enterprises, a company that had set up one of their remote offices in town a few years back. Lucas didn't know much about them and didn't really care to either. He looked for a name, Janet Dupree. He wondered where Janet Dupree was off to in such a hurry. None of his business. He would leave the ID with the cashier. He was sure the woman would be back for it eventually. As he made his way back to the line, he saw Samuel miming a laser rifle shooting at invisible aliens just like the Marines did in the movie. He laughed at the sight. Mary reached over and made the boy stop with a shake of her head and a grip on his arm. Lucas was happy in that moment. The noise of the crowded coffee shop, the smell of ice cream and lattes, seeing his two most favorite people in the world, it made his face break out in a huge dopey grin. As he put his arm around Mary and ran his fingers through Samuel's hair, all his worries were forgotten. All the pressures of life melted away. "Why are you suddenly so happy?" Mary asked. "No reason in particular. Just glad to be alive. Glad to have you two by my side." "Oh, we're glad to have you by ours as well." They walked up to the counter and ordered. The ice cream was as delicious as ever. They traveled the streets for a few minutes, taking in the sights and sounds of the Hoover Springs nightlife, or lack thereof, and then jumped back in the truck, driving back towards home. Lucas didn't know this, but it would be the final time he would ever see his hometown in this way again. The next time he would be here, things would be much different. For the small town of Hoover Springs, everything was about to change. You have been listening to the audiobook of Night Brings Darkness by J.M. Gaines. The novel of this production is available on Amazon through ebook or paperback. If you are enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.